Thanks for joining us again. So we wanted to kick off the first part of a two-part series. John, Sue, and Rebecca will handle the second half next week, but wanted to help you strengthen your communications with real quick, simple framework. And what it all starts with is the foundation of what you already fundamentally understand, being person-centered. So we want to extend that to your communication. So the first thing with any communication is to get very focused on the audience. And by the very nature of your organizations, you have a more complex task than many other businesses out there do, because you have so many different audiences and stakeholders involved in so many different aspects of the work that you do. You talk to individuals served, families, donors and supporters, the community, the media, policymakers, and a whole bunch of other audiences that I may not even be listing here. And what often happens is we struggle to communicate with all of them. Case in point, the homepage of your website. It's like, well, we have to say all these things to all these different people, and it often becomes, frankly, a muddied mess because we're trying to do too much for too many different people. So we always encourage providers to start by being audience-centered, person-centered with your communication. So the first thing you want to do is, all right, who is this communication, whether it's an email, a conversation, an address, an annual report, who are you speaking specifically to? Then once you're clear on who you're speaking to, and keep somebody specific in mind, a real person, that helps in the writing process. Think about what is the desired outcome that you want to have. So what do you want to have happen when this is communicated? So a couple of key tips to help you here are, I've noticed this trend when people write. It seems like there's a little invisible switch somewhere in our head where it's like, I'm sitting down to write about our organization. I have to be professional now. And we start writing in a way that's very different from how we actually communicate verbally. And most of us are much stronger at verbal communication than written communication. So that's why I suggested think of a real person in your mind. Imagine that you're just going to have a cup of coffee with that person. How would you talk to them about this thing? Even record yourself having that conversation and then write that. And it'll make your writing a lot stronger and a lot more effective. And as you're communicating, you understand things so well, you're so familiar with this, you're so passionate about it, it's easy to shortcut things or just give too much at once for somebody to handle. So think of it this way. There's a great analogy from the author Donald Miller, where he talks about communicating with people. Imagine that the person that you're talking to is walking on a treadmill, and now each idea that you give them is a bowling ball. And every concept that you give them that's hard to understand is a bowling ball coated in Vaseline. Obviously, you give them too much, at a certain point, they're just gonna drop everything and get off the treadmill and walk away. So you'll wanna be very focused and specific on one or two core ideas that you want them to leave with. Then as you're writing, how can you connect this to a personal story? Bring it back to person-centered. So often lately I've been looking at annual reports and videos that have to reach a lot of people. And the trend that I see is we share all these numbers, these facts, these statistics, X number of people served. We've driven this many thousands or millions of miles this year in transportation to take people to outings and day services and this and that, and we list things. And those are all good, but it's not emotional, it doesn't connect with us. We're passionate about the work because of the impact on the people that we get to build relationships with. Share some of those small stories that make those statistics actually relatable. It's going to be hard for me to remember how many thousands or millions or tens of thousands of this or that you have or want or need. All those numbers become very overwhelming. How can we make it relatable? A donation of this amount can make a story like this possible. Connect the dots for people. Another example of this, how stories can be powerful. When communicating with DSPs, so often we talk about, well, we want quality care. And obviously you do, but everyone has a different definition of it. So what is your definition? How can we make it relatable? One of our favorite stories from a DSP we've talked to, he shared a story of one of his best days where he was working with an individual who's always very quiet in the home, reserved, doesn't want to kind of come out of his shell and interact with the other gentlemen in the home. And the DSP knows that he is a big Oakland Raiders fan. So what did the DSP do? He went and found a DVD of the last time the Raiders won the Super Bowl and hosted a Super Bowl party for this gentleman. Planned everything out, the food, decorations, and made the day about this individual. So by telling that type of story, we can really highlight what we mean when we talk about exceptional care, or things like that, to make concepts relatable to staff in our communication. Then finally, to wrap up any communication, think about the call to action. What is it that you want to happen after this? What do you want the person who's read this communication, listened to it, watched this video, what do you want them to do next? They should be very clear on it. Too often we kind of leave it out or leave it just dangling some vague, hey, call us, help us. Be specific in how people can help you. What can they do? And think of creative ways, because sometimes we don't always need financial support. A provider recently shared a post on Facebook that I love. They highlighted a donation that they received of old VHS movies, because one of the individuals with the stay-at-home orders really enjoys movies, and a family donated some movies that they and their family don't watch anymore, and they posted it online. That's something pretty easy and relatable that I think most anyone could do. So share specifically how people can help. So the framework again is focus on the audience. Who are you specifically talking to? Think of that person. Then what is the desired outcome? What do you want to have happen here? Make it personal and relatable. You have amazing stories to share. Please share them with the world. And then what do you want the audience to do afterwards? What action do you want them to take? Happy to take any questions on that. I know I've thrown a lot at you real quickly.
I think, Scott, it was great examples, because so many times we think about what we want to communicate as opposed to what the audience is ready to hear, what they're trying to deal with. And I can't think of how many times, whether it's been state people, an exec of an agency, or a family member who's trying to communicate with a staff, and they just say, well, people aren't listening to me. And without thinking about what is it we're trying to say. And I shared with Scott and Craig this morning of a provider in Cleveland had to bring one of her managers up short a little bit because she was chastising one of their staff who didn't remember that they had read and understood the complete policy manual for the organization in orientation. And then they're chewing them out and said, well, you signed that you read this document and you know them all. Well, of course, that was not a very effective training technique or correction along the way. So great example. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use video to target and communicate those messages with your audience. Wanted to share with you a couple of things, really 3 things coming up in July. One is, it is a focus on getting people with disabilities and those that support them to register to vote. Many people remember that this is actually an obligation of organizations under the Help America Vote Act, that we're there to help people to register that want to and to participate at any level. The second is, it is an anniversary of the ADA on July 26th. And so this is the 30th anniversary. Hard for some of us to believe who were around back then and actually attended the signature day with President H.W. Bush of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but a great way to remind people of how far we've come and the things that we're doing. The third is just to share with you again, urge people to think about the census. And we've got a new video that'll be coming out in July on the census. We'll be glad to share with you. But it's important that people with disabilities be counted, including those that are in residential supports, who may not be counted because people think, gee, our waiver homes don't have to submit information. That is essentially important along the way. The last piece I wanted to share, it triggered with me was Scott talking about being person-centered. A friend just sent me a new book that is now available on Amazon. I put it in the chat. It is a great book of using positive psychology in how we support people with disabilities. And it's one of the best, easiest reads I've seen in a long time, with a lot of examples for folks on how to transfer this idea of being person-centered, not only to the people we support, but a lot of ideas for our staff. And how do we be person-centered with everybody in our organization? They worked on it for over 2 years and really done nicely. And it's with Art and Thane Dykstra, who some of you have met because they've been on our calls in the past from Illinois. So just a little plug for a good piece of information out there. Great. Well, we're about at the end of our 10 minutes and a little over. We can, if people need to go, again, we're so glad to have you. Again, anybody have any questions or what you'd like to do? Next week, we're going to, again, tips on how you can up your game with video and connect with folks in some totally different ways. And some of you are doing that right now. And so we look forward to having you back next week. Excellent. Well, we'll stick around, but if you need to go, thanks for spending 10 minutes with us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.
It seems like there's so many like conflicting Zoom meetings right now at noon. It seems like noon's the time for everyone.
Well, everybody's trying different times, yes. So thanks for squeezing us in, and it's always great to hear from folks what's going on too. So if you got questions or thought, give us an email, take a shout, and glad to have you here.
Thanks.
Great.
Have a great week.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.